Time to get started on this 66 Bassman. All these filter caps that are trying to turn into cauliflower are going to go away. People ask why I don't hollow these out, remove the innards, and put the brown cardboard tubes on the new capacitors. A couple reasons. Number one, I think it's a little deceptive to the casual buyer. Maybe at a amp show, it may appear that it's all original, and for some insane reason that increases the price. Number two, it disguises the fact that I use high quality capacitors, which have date codes on them, so the next tech can know how old they are, and people can know that, hey, yes, this was recapped. It was recapped well using very high quality capacitors. And the third reason is that the new capacitors I use are both smaller in diameter than the tubes here, here, and here, and larger in diameter, not by much, but enough, on the tubes here. So I can't do it on these, even if I wanted to. And on these, I'd have to put silicone inside the tube and on the bottom of the tube so the cap is secured correctly, and that would mess up the cardboard. It would be a one-time thing, and I think it's just kind of silly. So I just take these out, and I put them in a bag, and I return them with the amp. So if the owner ever wants to sell it to a collector, you can say, here's the amp, and here are the parts it came with. And if you put them back in, the amp won't work anymore, and things are likely to catch on fire. But there they are in all their original glory. Quick note before I get started. The genius of Leo Fender's amps is that they were designed to be easy to service, because he came from a radio repair background. He started off servicing existing amplifiers. And it's important to remember that he designed them to be easy to service because he expected them to need service. He knew that capacitors have a lifespan, and at some point they need to be replaced, and he made it very easy to do. He didn't expect anyone to hold on to these things for 60 years because they're supposed to last 10 to 15, 20 years maybe. Anyway, let me get started. All new caps in place. Yeah, I know that's a 22, not the original value there. This will sound better. 2 watts. Everything redone properly. You've seen this in my other Fender restorations. I don't need to go on and on. Let's move on to the bias stuff. All right, I've removed the old bias cap. And this, and this all measure fine. This diode's beginning to fail. It doesn't pass its tests. And as diodes are inexpensive but crucial, I'm going to replace all those diodes, and I'll replace that resistor at the same time, because we want to have a rock-solid bias supply and rectification circuit. And if this bothers you because I'm taking out an old part from 1966, again, the thing that makes Fender amps great is that Leo Fender designed things to be easy to service because he expected them to need service. Changing this stuff out for new, reliable stuff will not take away the tone, T-O-A-N. It will make sure that all the things that you love about this amp will continue to work optimally, and things will not be as likely to be damaged in actual use. All right, that's much better. Unsurprisingly, these new components all test good. Next, I've got to clean the board. There was a liquid spill at some point in the past, or a lot of humidity. I suspect a liquid spill, so I'm going to put these screws in a WD-40 bath and see if they come back to life. If not, I can replace them. And I'm just going to start cleaning this board because it's really yucky. And all that old residue just really is not a good thing. It can be conductive. So this is a fairly repetitive process with multiple passes necessary, and end up with lots of little bits of paper towel full of gunk. I'm going to spare you the gory details, but you notice I have all the wires up off the chassis so I can get the funk underneath it, because there are places like right here, there's some brown discoloration on the end of this yellow wire. It's because the chassis and this wire were contacting each other right here, and whatever the moisture spill was, actually it's a red wire that's faded, the red cloth. Anyway, it gets dark at that end. It was laying against the chassis, and whenever the spill happened in this amp, I got a spot of rust here, and it was all embedded into the cloth of the wire. Now that's a grid, so there should be no voltage there, but in principle, you just don't want to have any contamination of insulated cloth. So getting the cloth-covered wire up off the chassis means I can clean beneath it. It also means I can soak the hell out of all this cloth with alcohol, and it will evaporate. The new power cable is not going in until tomorrow, so they'll have plenty of time to dry. And eagle-eyed viewers might notice that there's no backing board beneath here. I pulled it out, give it a separate cleaning because it can trap moisture and funk and contamination. This is after 2 passes. This is rust in those 2 areas and just general yuck. Almost looks like when you open up a remote control and there's a battery been leaking in it, but none of the capacitors were leaking. That's just probably stuff that was growing on the board at some point, and it got old and died and left little bits of itself everywhere. But there is rust everywhere on the chassis. Just fairly yucky process, but when I'm done, it'll all be returned to a fair replica of its original glory. And you'll still have that fading on the formerly black board. I can't do anything about that, but I'll make sure that structurally and electronically it is a sound foundation for all this stuff. Okay, the board's all cleaned. It doesn't look fantastic still, but it is cleaned, and the backer board's been cleaned and put back in place. And those 2 screws are moved just too far gone, so it's getting new screws to hold the board in place. You can see here I've got some new plate and slope resistors in place. This thing has some 1 watts in there, and a combination 1 watt carbon comps, like Fender used, and so some look to be carbon films like you'd find in a Marshall. But they were pulls from some other amp, and the leads were too short. And while they were in place, they were not going into the eyelets, and the old leads of the old components were in the eyelets, and there's all gobs of tack soldering. And the one on this plate actually had come loose at one end, so this amp would not have sounded very good. Between that and the failing diode in the bias supply, this amp would have sounded very bad indeed. Let's move on to the next bit of stuff to do. Down at this end, I've got the bias ground wire, the center taps from the power transformer, and the ground wire for the reservoir stage. These used to be connected to ground lugs mounted to these bolts. I'm going to solder them to the chassis and put in a new solder ground for the new power cable. And then I'm going to turn my attention to the output tube sockets. All right, new grounds for the bias. All these, the new grounded power cable, neutral going to primary, hot going to the fuse inner, then to the power switch, then the other primary. New grid stoppers, these 1.5Ks, have drifted up to almost 3K, and new 3 watt 470 ohm screen grid resistors. Time to put some tubes back in here and power it up and see where we're at now. Okay, this is the first time I will have powered this on, as it was not safe as it came in. So all the things I knew absolutely had to be changed have been changed. I expect I'll have to clean the pots and the tube sockets, and we'll see if the tubes are any good. But the first thing I want to do, I want to reconfirm it's got a 2 amp fuse, because it's been a while since I ordered the parts. Yeah, 2 amp fuse. All right, and I'm going to verify that we have bias voltage once I power it on. We have no light. That just means that the bulb is probably bad. That's kind of to be expected. Negative 47.6, negative 45.8. That's that bias balance there. So that's not a problem. Let me just confirm heating, though I see lights on the tube, so I know I've got that. All right, so it's powered on, it's in standby. I've got the volumes off, got a current limiter on, and I guess the first thing I need to do is confirm the B plus now that the output tubes have warmed up. So we're at 408, which means that on the plates we're at just under 408. No noise. Neither do I have any signal. So let's see if we have a telltale tube. 268, 248, -1, 0. A spectra of a bad tube. Let's check the cathodes over here. 0, 1.5, 0. So we've got some cathodes which have conductivity, others which do not. 342, 378. So we got plate voltage, but the tubes are not conducting in such a way that either there is something systemically wrong with the amp still, or we've got more than one bad preamp tube. So let me take a look at those first. We'll just do this on a channel by channel basis. I got hum when I remove that tube shield. I'm going to pull V2, which is common to both channels, and it is a generic no-name tube. V1, which is the bass channel. It is an older Sovtech 12AX7WA. All right, and aha! I had never pulled the tubes on this amp before. It's another generic, maybe Sovtech or Chinese, but look what was in there, that pin, if you can see. Now, I don't think this tube is going to go home with this amp. This amp's too nice to have just a generic tube like this. But let me realign that pin. See what happens when the tube is inserted correctly. Just as I showed in that, Black Star video, where somebody put in L6 incorrectly and caused shorts and broke 2 tubes. It can be an expensive thing to do. On a 12AX7 is usually fairly inexpensive. All right, I have a hum now, so we're making progress. Let's see what we have on the voltages for that tube now that the pins are lined up correctly. All right, so lower plate voltage in the 200s now. We have cathode voltage, positive cathode voltage on both, as expected. And here at the cathode of the phase inverter, 73 volts. So those 2 tubes are now working. Let's just bring the normal channel up first, and we'll get to the bass channel in a minute. Let's bring in V2, which is shared for both channels. And as it warms up, we'll listen for hum. And I'll be checking its cathodes and such. It only has one cathode and one plate. When I went to measure voltage at this cathode, and then I was confirming voltage at the actual pin, I found that this wire had just broken off. So let me reconnect that to the pin and see where we're at. Well, as you can hear, now that the connection has been restored to that cathode on V2, which is shared by both channels, there's a slight hum in the background, and you can hear the interference from my router, which is great. And we're going to have voltage here. 1.8, and over here at the V1 first cathode we've got 1.6, and then at its second cathode 1.5. So we have signal and voltage on both channels. Don't have any real microphonics issues. Now when I first took the tube shields off to start this process, the hum started. So the AB165 in stock form is a very sensitive circuit, just on the verge of oscillation. So I'm going to put these tube shields on here, and the noise just went down a lot. It's not just susceptible to environmental noise. And the hum decreased, and that will decrease further when this thing is shielded. But I imagine it's going to have some other challenges ahead of us. Let's see how it's sounding first. I'm going to turn off the current limiter and see where the B plus goes now. All right, about 425, much better place to be. All right, volume at 0, bass and treble at mid, plug it in, strat, a little bit of bleed. Actually that pot was the treble pot was at 0, not noon. That's because I had the labels at noon, but the knob is not on the pot correctly. And that pot has been turned. You can see that the leads are all going to the left a little bit too much. I'll fix all that. Needs a little bit of a clean. A lot of it worked itself out. Still got a little bit of an issue. It could be a pot, it could be a DC thing. Let's see. Has that switch failed? It was on deep mode at first, then I took it out of deep mode, and then now it's not coming back. Let's see if cleaning the contacts of that switch help. Not really. So I'll be looking at that, whether these phenolic boards on the back sometimes come loose on the switches. Yes, meter. They just don't make good contact. And the sound change is a bit more dramatic than I'm used to in these. And the bass is just not doing anything anymore. I wonder if it has to do with these wires being so stressed from that pot being turned. I'm gonna redo this area, remove this knob and loosen this pot and get it all oriented right and confirm a bunch of stuff. But I don't think it's necessarily the switch so much as the bass just went away. And this channel, being the bass channel, should have a good bit of it. Come back to that. Let's see what the normal channel is sounding like. All right, bright switch off. At least the knobs on the treble and bass say that they're at noon. No lack of low end on the bass there. There's that weird, oh, the sound's gone away now. Bright switch. Not doing very much. I mean, it's doing a little bit. Sometimes the values of these caps drift over time, these old ceramics, and that may just be a much smaller value than it started off as, in which case you're going to hear less effect. I'll revisit that later. There's also some sensitivity to noise there. For an amp that's been in sad condition for a number of years, this is a very promising start. So I think I'm going to stop this video here, and then we'll resume on the front panel oddities.